The Vincast, Australia's premier wine podcast, would like to acknowledge the support of all of its former guests. And if you listen back to previous episodes and you have enjoyed an episode with a particular person, please do support them. Go and buy their wines, go to their online wine retailing business, go to their restaurants. Just find out ways that you can actually get in touch with the guests who have been on the podcast, because they do generously donate their time to appear on the show, and in some way you can help support them. If you'd like to get involved with the podcast through sponsorship or partnership, I would love to hear from you. So please do get in contact. You can reach me at thevincast@gmail.com. Help the podcast grow, help it get out to other wine lovers like yourself. But as always, thank you for listening. On this episode of the Vincast, I chat with my guest, Tessa Brown, about working as a viticulturalist around Australia and about her recent move to the Beechworth region of Victoria to establish her own vineyard and winery. I also answer the question why I hug cement eggs when I visit wineries, and I also ask another question for this week that I'd love to hear your answers to, so stay tuned. Hello, Vincasters, and welcome back to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Guestbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and here we are, episode 52 of the Vincast. It is great to have you on board. As always, I would love to hear from you, so do make sure you get in touch. Listen up at the end of the episode to hear about how you can follow me and how you can contact me. So, last week, I ended the episode asking people what was their first interaction with wine that set them on the path of wine appreciation, wine aficionadoism, if that's a word. And former guest and superfan Jonathan Brooke responded on Facebook talking about when he actually was studying hospitality management at TAFE, and he took a wine studies course from an enology professor or expert who came in, and he found it so fascinating, which is sort of the way that I got into wine. I actually did it through one of my first jobs in wine, which was just in basic wine retail, and there was an introductory wine course that was run by Gage Lassiter, who worked at Swinburne University out in Lilydale, and it gave me such an interesting introduction and appreciation for the differences of variety and region, that kind of thing, and that really set me on my path. So thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. I also I haven't had any real questions for Ask the Wino yet, but I thought some people have been asking me, they've been seeing some photos of me on Instagram and on through my website of me hugging cement egg fermenters in wineries. Now, you might be wondering when I started doing that. It was actually visiting a winery in Chile. It was a biodynamic winery, and something I started to notice was that I started to see more and more cement egg fermenters in wineries that grew their fruit biodynamically, and so I had a photo taken of me hugging the cement egg, and the next time I saw a cement egg in a winery, I had a photo of me taken, and it just sort of snowballed from there. So if you keep following me on Instagram, you'll notice that every week or so I might put a picture of me hugging a cement egg that I was taking in a winery around the world. My guest for this week's episode of the Vincast is Tessa Brown, who has worked for many years as a viticulturalist in a number of different regions all around Australia, and also for large and small producers. So she has recently relocated up to Beechworth in Victoria. So she's talked about her experiences and what she's hoping to achieve with this new project. I hope you enjoy the episode. If you do, make sure you get in touch with us, but I will see you on the other side. Tess, thank you for joining me here in Vincast headquarters for a studio episode.
Well, thanks for having me over.
Obviously, thanks for coming down to Melbourne, I guess, from the farm. Tell me, where did the love or the interest in wines originally start for you?
I'm actually from far north Queensland. I'm the daughter of a couple of cattle and cane farmers, so it doesn't really make sense that I ended up in wine. But
They weren't wine drinkers at all?
no, that's where it changes. No, Dad has always been a fairly eager wine drinker.
There you go.
And yeah, he used to collect wine, and North Queensland being hot and humid, we actually stored all of his wine in a cold room where we used to hang sides of beef from farm kills and things like that, because we used to butcher all our own meat. So Mum and Dad started giving me a little bit of wine to have with meals with them from about 12 years on or onwards. So
they introduced you to that appreciation of having wine in the context of a meal and sharing and that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's North Queensland. It's so lowbrow, but definitely wine was a part of the meal. And, it was the early 90s, so it was the beginning of that most recent boom period, that sort of period from the start of the 90s until probably, the turn of the millennium, where there was an explosion in things to choose from, things to buy, and
quality and different regions. And so even up in far north Queensland, access to wines was okay?
In the 90s, it was a little bit more old school. Definitely back in those days, there were subscription-based things like, Westpac's subscription wine dozens, or Cellar Masters, or the Wine Society. So, Dad got, old school booze from people like that. And we'd have a glass of Barossa Shiraz with dinner and things like that. So I didn't have a knowledgeable appreciation as a teenager, but I certainly knew it existed, enjoyed it, and my eldest sister did teaching, and her first teaching position was in Wagga Wagga in New South Wales. And in my last year of high school, we trekked down to see her in her new job in Wagga, and Dad was like, "Come on, let's go and have a day down in Rutherglen and have some ports and muskets." The very first winery we walked into in Rutherglen was a place called Cofield.
I haven't heard that name in years.
I know. Is it
still around?
Absolutely. And making probably about the same amount of wine it was making sort of 15 or 20 years ago.
Okay.
I walked in and breathed deeply and thought, this smells great. This seems interesting. And I think we had to put in our university preferences in the middle of the year. So I think we got back from holidays, got the university forms, and I'm like, I'm going to put down viticulture first and enology second and see what happens. I got into veterinary science at University of Queensland, which was a much more prestigious course. But I'm like, no, I'm going to go and learn how to grow grapes. I moved to Wagga when I was 17 at the end of year 12. And
well, at least you knew someone there.
Yeah. It's a university town. It's it didn't take long to settle in. And the rest is history. I sort of did viticulture full time for about 5 years, and then went back and did postgrad winemaking, and jumped across to the dark side, and now I sort of balance both persuasions, I guess.
So Rutherglen was the epiphany moment, was it?
Well, it was the first winery I stepped into. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously it's not a sexy or cool wine region, but it was...
But at the same time, it's a region so heavily steeped in history, Australian wine history.
Oh, and it was fascinating. It was 1996, I'm probably talking about North Queensland, Dad loved Bobby Burns Shiraz from Campbell's. He got it every year, and it was an eye-opening thing. So, I guess I've been in the industry for, 15 or so years now, and almost 20. Time sneaks up, man.
It does.
You laugh, but it's terrifying. Things change over time, but I'm still, it's still nice to go back to Cofield. I'm sort of friends with Damien.
You're certainly a bit closer these days.
It's like 40 minutes away from Beechworth. Everything's so close up there. Yeah.
So what were your experiences? So you studied viticulture, or was there also a winemaking component to the course?
No, they were separate back in those days. They are offered together now as a sort of muddled together, not quite a double degree. But
I think, to be honest, I think that is preferable. I think there needs to be a little bit more appreciation for both sides. You know, it's very easy to work in one or the other, but someone who actually appreciates, you know, a wine from start to finish is going to be a much better viticulturist if they know where it's going to end up, or a better winemaker if they know where it's coming from.
Yeah, for sure. I did start viticulture always thinking that I'd go back and do wine science later. I think it's just that they weren't offered as a combined course back then, that I had to do one first and another second. But coming from a farming background, I did want to have an agricultural appreciation before I did anything too technical or arty. So it was what made sense in my head. So I did that.
Coming from that agricultural farming background, do you think that possibly gave you an appreciation for knowing where it was coming from and having a sense of place?
Yeah, absolutely. I probably didn't appreciate that until relatively recently. It probably wasn't until I'd been working almost exclusively in the cellar for 3 or 4 years that I really yearned to do both, and that was probably at the point where I'm like, okay, now I have to start to work out a way to bring them back together, because unless you're born into a vigneron family, or unless you buy a vineyard and make the wine yourself and are a vigneron.
Which even in the 90s was still a very expensive proposition.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite difficult to combine the two. It is actually a lot easier to either be a vineyard person or be a winery person, just the way the industry is set up in Australia, I think.
I think it's really unfair, particularly the Europeans, to kind of point at Australia and go, oh, you guys don't know anything about what it is to be a vineyard. It's like, well, to be fair, most of you have been born into a wine family. You haven't had to buy vineyards. You haven't had to buy a cellar or a lot of equipment. So just, shut up.
Oh, no, look, it's easy to identify differences and use them to leverage yourself into, a visibly nicer sounding way of being. But it's not as easy as it sounds. And we're going through that process now, planting vines and making booze, and trying to balance the books at the end of the day. So we're about 18 months into the process. So this is really, I'm going to look back one day and it'll be so romantic, but it's a lot of hard work.
Of course.
Definitely.
Lots of biddings with the bank, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, not too many actually. As long as you pay what they want, they leave you alone.
Oh, good. So in terms of what were you working at all whilst you were studying?
Viticulture.
Because I would think it's not like doing a winemaking course where obviously the bulk of the winemaking happens during the vintage, and so I would think possibly students have to be either in the university winery or going off and kind of working a bit of vintage to kind of get that experience even whilst they're studying. Whereas I would think it'd be pretty different with viticulture, because it's much more around.
Yeah, there's a few ways to skin a cat. Back in the 90s at Charles Sturt Uni, they encouraged students to do 2 years internally of viticulture and then finish the course externally and go out and get a job and work and study by correspondence, which is what I did.
Sure.
So, I did 2 years internally and then moved to Orange and got a baby viticulturist position with a managed investment scheme vineyard up there. And worked for a few years there. And then that sort of fed me into my subsequent jobs. And, I worked all around and then ended up over in Adelaide doing postgrad winemaking in 2005. With winemaking, they always made one of your subjects doing a vintage. So if they encourage you to do vintage in warm areas, so you could start in, January and finish in sort of February or March
before the semester
actually starts, but that wasn't really possible with viticulture. But it's easy to work in viticulture around university holidays, because your October holidays, you've got pruning, got pruning in winter, you've got wire work or shoot thinning or training in spring, and you've got foliage work and spraying in summer. So you could always find something to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So leaving university, the first sort of step into the industry was working in terms of viticulture.
Yeah, up in Orange.
Yeah.
Vineyard.
And even then, Orange would have been pretty new, I would think.
Yeah. I remember going to, the local growers meetings and things like that, and they were very cognizant of how new they were. I mean, there were a few mature vineyards back then, but not much more than 30 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Orange would have a great resource of nice mature vines now. Everything would be 25 years old. But that back then,
compared to somewhere like Rutherglen, for example.
Yeah, with ancestor vines, definitely. But that was the 90s. Back then there were 25 or 30 students in viticulture and 50 students in winemaking. Today there's less than a dozen. It follows the boom and bust cycle, the 25-year cycle of the wine industry, basically. So lots of vineyards were getting planted back in the day. So people all went out and trained vines and did things like that.
So basically, there was a lot of work to be done, at that time, with a lot of investment going into wine, and I can imagine it would have been pretty exciting times, new frontiers as well, new regions and stuff like that. Did you travel much? Did you get to sort of many regions and visit wineries and taste stuff? Were you interested in kind of expanding your palate?
Definitely. I tried to. It was more difficult for vineyard kids to expand their palates than winery kids. It's just the nature of the beast. People that tend to end up funneled into vineyards don't get to, they're beer drinkers. They're not serious wine drinkers. So they're
farmers as opposed to professionals.
I think
that's
so.
Probably a poor way of putting it.
I know what you're saying. But there was a gang of us from uni who were mates, and we all lived within a drive of each other, and we used to do our best to make an effort to get together and taste as much as we could, as often as we could.
Sure.
And I didn't get to travel much overseas when I was young in vineyards, just because of the work, but travelled a lot around Australia and worked in a few different places.
Right, okay. So, in terms of getting over to Adelaide, what sort of drew you to Adelaide?
Well, going back to the question you asked about travelling and tasting to expand your palate, the way to do that as a vineyard person was to go with different jobs. So I think I stayed in Orange for 2.5 years, and then I moved to Canberra for 2.5 years, and that's where I did my first winery vintage. Mm-hmm. And then, I did a vintage in Strathbogies and then moved across to Adelaide, and it was kind of working in a few different places for experience and palate exposure and things like that. But I knew about the postgrad course in Adelaide, and sort of was getting towards doing that. So did a vintage in the Adelaide Hills in 2005 before going back to uni and doing postgrad.
So what was the postgraduate course?
It was the best option for rounding out your knowledge. So Adelaide do a grad dip in enology, a postgrad dip in enology, and masters, and they do it in.
So sort of the same thing when I studied at Adelaide.
But you did. I
did wine business.
Wine business,
but it was exactly the same structure. Grad. Actually, it was a grad cert, grad dip, and then masters.
Something like that. So, what was your first degree?
Just a Bachelor of Arts.
Okay.
So and that was the thing. Like to be eligible for the masters program, you had to either already have a bachelor's degree in, I guess, in either business or in some form of wine, or you had to have a bachelor's degree plus at least 2 years experience in the industry, and I had that.
Yeah. When were you there?
I graduated in 2011.
You're a bit after me, but.
But I was also external. I wasn't.
Oh, really?
I wasn't based there. Yeah, so it took me 3.5 years to do it.
I thought you had to do it internally, but maybe.
No.
Oh, wine business is probably different to.
Yeah, I mean, I had residential school and stuff like that, but that was only for viticulture and oenology subjects.
Okay, so you were living here and just going across to Adelaide.
Yeah, I was living and working. I was studying part time.
Yep, amazing, fun times over there.
Yeah, I do feel like I possibly missed out, because I hadn't been to Adelaide before, and I thought it got such a bad reputation.
Bad reputation as in being a bit dead, or just being a big country town?
No, just Melburnians hate it. They always say, "Oh, Adelaide's such a shithole."
Do they?
It's not. Well, I don't think they say it as much anymore.
Okay,
I don't know if it's just a football rivalry or something like that. But they always kind of, "Oh, you know, Adelaide's full of bogans and stuff like that." But to be honest, a lot of Melburnians say that about everywhere.
Okay, yeah, I'm not a naturalised Melburnian. So at the time I moved to Adelaide, it was the biggest city I'd ever lived in, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to get right up in this and it's going to be great. And I had a really fun couple of years over there.
I think it's great.
Yeah, worked in some good restaurants to pay the bills, and it was fun.
Oh, you had a bit of hospital experience?
Oh, yeah, I did casual hospitality for 7 years, I reckon. I think started out in the Ag Tavern at Charles Sturt University, and
there you go.
the last place I worked was at a little bistro called Rigoni's in Lee Street in Adelaide.
I know Rigoni's.
Yeah, you've probably eaten there. Rigoni's alumni. There's a few of us in Melbourne, and that was just before I finished postgrad. And
did you working in hospitality? Was that another opportunity to try more stuff?
Expand your palate. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I always did it. Even when I was working in vineyards, I'd do a shift or something, or 2 shifts or something on weekends and things, just to minimise closing the doors. Like, you want to keep doors open for tasting and things. But
also, again, it would have given you the opportunity to actually connect with the consumers. So again, from start to absolute finish, and selling the wines and talking about the wines to the consumers who are eventually going to drink the wines that, even as a viticulturist, you're growing the grapes for wine that is going to be on someone's table at some point.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way, but it did make sense. Mainly, I just, I've never really been good at being too compartmentalised.
Sure.
I mean, this life that Jeremy and I have had for the last 18 months, it's the most specific and focused life I've ever had.
Sure.
And Beechworth's not remote, but it's not in metropolitan areas. So I think I've always tried to do a few different things just to not get too narrow-minded, I guess. But I'd never really thought about it carefully before.
Well, from the sounds of where you've sort of done quite a bit of vintage work or viticultural work, you are sort of leaning more towards the cooler climate regions. You know, Orange is relatively cool climate, Canberra District, Adelaide Hills, Strathbogie. Yeah. Do you feel that you kind of connected more with the cooler climate regions?
I would say I did, but I don't think it was through logical thought processes.
It wasn't something conscious.
No, that's
because I just find it interesting, considering you come from far north Queensland.
Yeah.
You know, to sort of go, I'm going to go the other extreme and go to the cooler climate for viticulture.
Yeah, I guess I said goodbye to it. I think it's really just where all the investment was.
Sure. Okay.
You know, when you don't when you don't have a family business to go back to or anything like that, and you have to get your own jobs and go places.
Sure.
You know, Orange had vineyard expansion, Strathbogie's had vineyard expansion, Adelaide Hills had it, Canberra had it, because at the time, obviously, the then BRL Hardy did its Canberra vineyard and winery. Obviously, that's now kaput. But
amongst others.
Pardon?
Amongst others.
Amongst others, absolutely. But, you know, in that last boom, a lot of growth was in moderate to cooler climates. I wouldn't call Strathbogie's cool, or, I mean, I wouldn't call Adelaide Hills truly cool, except up around Ashton and Basket Range. But those moderate climate areas, they had a lot of growth back in the late 90s, and that's just where the jobs were. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I have ended up funneled into a moderate to cooler realm, I guess. And where our vineyard is up in Beechworth is up at 800 metres, so it is. I would class it's definitely the coolest part of Beechworth, but I'd class it as cool, definitely. Not Tassie cool, but we'll harvest our fruit at the end of March and into April, so I'd say that.
Still pretty late. But like, I worked in the Yarra Valley, you know, and to mention, I would start harvesting beginning of February.
Sparkle base, though.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but even so, they're still harvesting, and that's not just. I mean, I don't mean necessarily from the Yarra Valley, but they're getting fruit from a lot of different parts of Victoria.
Yeah.
But even then, like the Yarra Valley's not as cool as people might think.
Oh, the Yarra Valley's incredibly diverse, though. I mean,
different areas. And I think that's part of the problem with a lot of the regions in Australia. To be perfectly honest, like it's so difficult to classify the Adelaide Hills. You know, there's so many different sites. So to sort of say Adelaide Hills Chardonnay is fantastic, it's like, well, some parts of the Adelaide Hills are outstanding for it, and some are just okay.
Yeah, I think it's really tricky. You could easily classify sub-regions in many of our established wine regions like Adelaide Hills or Yarra or
where I was in Western Australia last week, in Great Southern.
Yeah.
It's enormous.
Yeah, and, you know, people like Mac Forbes have obviously gone some way to doing that with his map series and his wines and things like that, but it is tricky because Wine Australia, when you look at it as an umbrella thing that wants to take a simple message to the market to grow recognition and grow familiarity and things like that. And
yeah, let's be a little bit cynical about that and say that they're operating in the interests of the people who are paying the highest amount of levy. And that's the big wine companies who.
I don't know that it's as direct as that. It may be as direct as that in some senses, but I think actually they just want to market a simple message. If you're trying to sell booze to someone in China or someone in London or something like that,
sure,
they understand Adelaide Hills, but they don't understand Ashton or Basket Range or whatever. And I totally agree with you. And I think the cynicism is in some cases warranted. Working in Mornington, I definitely got to say, well, that's Turong and that's Red Hill and that's Merricks, and you know the sub-regions are as easy to note in a glass as you can imagine, but to get anything formally recognised on an industry body basis quite difficult. People just even small producers will tell you it makes it harder to market, not easier. So I think it's just a symptom of where the industry's at the moment, and I have no doubt by the time you and I are in rocking chairs that regions will have been divvied up into sub-regions and we'll be taking those messages out. It's just everything takes time to get the momentum to get it to happen.
One of the things that I've been feeling more often is that I feel like the Australian wine industry, particularly younger people who work in the wine industry, are a little bit impatient. I don't know if actually, I don't know what it is, but I think we all seem to be in a hurry, and we sort of, we want to make wine now, or we want to plant a vineyard now, or we want to change people's perceptions. Hurry! People aren't kind of allowing things and accepting that things do take time, and to sort of just relax and wait and accept things the way they are, and not get so hung up on why they're not the way they want them to be.
Yeah, I think about those sorts of things a lot, and I never know if they are more impatient, as you say, because I wouldn't class myself as a young person now. I'm probably at the start of my middle, if that makes any sense, because I'm in my sort of late 30s now. And I don't know if they seem impatient, or I just didn't notice that I was impatient when I was that age. But things are a lot different now. I mean, managed investment schemes are no longer, and we've got the legacy of whatever hasn't, vine area that hasn't been pulled out is mature and yielding, and it's a buyer's market for fruit. So the opportunities are manifold for people with an interest in wine who may not have a background get out and have a crack.
That is the exciting thing.
I was going to say, like with the people that you interview, just because I'm a little bit in the dark, most of them I would think would not be from a viticulture winemaking background like me. They'd be people that were doing something different and just succumbed to their passion and went, I'm going to die if I don't do this. I'm going to have a crack. Is that a fair...
No.
Or are you mostly interviewing folks that do have
It's a mix.
It's a mix.
It's a mix.
Yeah.
I've had a number of people who, in fact, I would say in terms of winemakers, or winemakers, viticulturists, that side of the business, most of the people I've interviewed of that nature have had a similar story in terms of like they haven't come from a wine background, but somehow they got introduced to wine, often from their parents, something like that. Like Luke Lambert. Luke Lambert's he's from Brisbane. And it was his parents who weren't in any way connected to the wine industry that loved wine and would drive down to Victoria and visit wineries and take him along. And that's where he got introduced to wine. And so same sort of thing. He said, I'd like to, go and study winemaking.
Okay. So most of the people that you're seeing have gone and done tertiary study and things like that.
Yep. And they've had experiences working for, in some cases, larger wine businesses, or in some cases smaller, and eventually have kind of found a way to sort of start their own business, and whether they are still buying fruit or whether they have managed to plant or purchase a vineyard. That I guess that's the interesting thing, is that there's so much going on. There's so many different ways of, I guess, making wine now. It's a lot more flexible, I've found.
Yeah.
And so it is a really exciting time.
For sure. And there's a heck of a lot of diversity. Perhaps I just notice the people who don't come from, who are making wine, who don't have a tertiary background, because they tend to market themselves really well, and you see a lot of them. And I don't have a particular opinion about it. I sort of notice it because, 15, 20 years ago, it was managed investment schemes and big infrastructure developments. And today that's the thing. The big wine businesses were expanding. Yeah. And that's where the investment was coming from. And now they're contracting. Yeah. And so that's opening up opportunities for individuals, I guess, or, small groups of people to have the opportunity, because fruit is probably a little bit more accessible, both in terms of availability and also price. Yeah. Absolutely. So I don't know if I have a positive or negative opinion about it at all. It's just it's how things go. If it wouldn't be like it is today if there wasn't the expansion in the 90s, and I think it's probably with the cultural movements towards natural wine and orange wine and quirky stuff, and less
and alternative
varieties. And alternative varieties, it's vastly more democratic. So, there's, if you dig into it, there's pros and cons in everything. But it's a interesting and very democratic time in the industry, I'd say. I think probably one of the most consistent themes of former guests of the podcast has been that they've experienced a lot whilst travelling overseas. So whether or not they went specifically for the opportunity to work vintage, for example, over in Europe, or whether they were just travelling and kind of went, that's some work I can do. Yeah. That was something that most of the winemaking guests I've had have had that experience. Did you have that experience? Probably not to the same extent that many of your other guests have had. I've only done 2 overseas vintages, and one of them was in New Zealand. So in 2003, I did a vintage in Rioja, which, 2003, as you might remember, was a challenging vintage, I think is probably the best way to say. Generous. Yeah. It was, I learned heaps and heaps and heaps, but, that was a 6-week period 12 years ago. And New Zealand's winemaking is probably not terrifically dissimilar to here. So I still have quite a bit of international vintage to expend still. Mm-hmm. And I think when our business is at a stable point where we can, be the bosses of our time and things like that, and when we're not slaves to buying posts and planting vines, I'll definitely try and do a few more vintages overseas, because that's an area where I'm a little bit short, and hope to flesh it out a bit. My partner's going to do vintage in Germany this year. He's an architect, he's never done vintage before, but he's got an Austrian background, so he's going to go over and do vintage in Germany. Why not Austria? We're planting... Germany's a bit easier, to be honest, for Australians. Yeah, I don't know why he didn't pick Austria, but why not Germany? He's got a good place to go to, and he practices German and uses EU passport, so that should be fun for him. And we're planting Riesling this spring, so he's going to come back and boss me around, which will be awesome.
But what about you? Where would be the what about you? Where would be the dream region for you to go and work vintage?
Relevant regions for me to work in because of what we're planting on our site. I'd like to do a German vintage. I need to do a Barolo vintage and need to do a Burgundian vintage if I can at some stage.
I'm sure your good friend Sally shared all of her experiences working with Chiara last year and made you very, very jealous.
Oh yeah, those guys lived pretty large for a few weeks over there. It sounded like an amazing experience. And I've got a few friends there, so hopefully I'll get to go there in the next few years.
What was the path that kind of took you down eventually wanting to establish something and do something for yourself?
Probably pragmatism. It is difficult to combine viticulture and winemaking in an employed position.
Sure.
And it's difficult to hang on to a good position as a woman if you want to have a family. I'm not saying anything terrifically controversial. I think
we'll leave that to our illustrious Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think I sat down a few years ago and really thought hard about all the women I knew who were employed winemakers who had families, and I could only come up with a couple of names: the lovely lady at Tarrawarra and Jerry McFall at Willow Creek. There's plenty of women with families in wine businesses, but they're usually family businesses. So I thought, if I'm going to hang on to what I'm passionate about, I'm probably going to have to do it myself. And I couldn't actually do it myself because I don't have tons of savings or anything. And that's where I was really fortunate that my partner was happy to do the business with me. I mean, he doesn't have tons of savings either, but together we can sort of muster something up and make it work, hopefully. So that pragmatism, I guess, is what drove us to, look for land, buy a farm, price it, plant vines and start making wine.
So what led you to Beechworth?
When we were looking at land, we wanted somewhere cool. Beechworth is probably moderate, and some sites are a bit warmer, but we like the area. I wanted to go to a GI that was small. One of the things I really appreciated about Mornington Peninsula is that it's a small GI. They've got a really clear message. Pinot, Chardonnay, Pinot. And I think it's easier to situate yourself in a market when you have a fairly cogent message. And Beechworth has a pretty cogent message with Shiraz and Chardonnay as well, and it's a small wine region. And my partner, being part Austrian, is a mad skier, and it's only 2 hours to the summit of Hotham from where we live.
Yeah,
so
well, I generally will make a bit of a stop in Beechworth on the way up to the snow each year.
You ski too, or are you bored?
No, well, I went back into skiing last winter, I think. Yeah,
we're skiers, so and I love Beechworth, and it's close to where I started my career, really. Yeah. So there was definitely some nostalgia there. That's a beautiful part of the world, and there's some nice people up there. So,
but one of the things that I find so interesting about Beechworth is there's still a lot of experimentation. You do find stuff like alternative varieties. It's not been a more recent thing. Like Giaconda's had Nebbiolo for years.
Yeah.
So it's not sort of stuck in this is what we do here kind of town. There's still lots of different opportunities, I guess, viticulturally, in particular.
Yeah, and there are a few of us. I think there's a couple of us planting vines, but a few younger people starting labels up there as well. I mean, obviously Adrian led the way for the new guard, and Mark Walpole as well with Fighting Gully Road. I mean, most of his gloss was with Greenstone, but now that business is sold, he can focus on Fighting Gully Road. So, he's had Sangiovese in the ground for over a decade up there. Yeah, there is experimentation up there, definitely. I think people start from a safety net of Shiraz and Chardonnay because that's tried and tested and proven. And then they do just one thing that's a little bit different, like Sorenberg with Gamay or Mark Walpole with Sangiovese, A-Rod with Tempranillo, and Gioconda with Nebbiolo. Pete Graham's got Pete Graham's obviously Rick's nephew. He's got the Nebbiolo that Rick was getting. Rick's planted a separate vineyard, which is now yielding. So and we're planting Nebbiolo as well. So it should be interesting.
Or a bit of fortified from Pennyweight.
Yeah, but they've got a fortified vineyard in Rutherglen.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, I do think they have some fortified stuff at their site near Beechworth, but they have their vineyard just on the outskirts of Rutherglen as well.
And again, that's kind of the interesting thing about Beechworth is, you are right in the middle of some of the coolest vineyard sites in Victoria, in that Alpine Valleys kind of area.
Yeah, Whitlands, definitely.
And then you've got like Rutherglen and Glenrowan, which are much warmer and great for big reds and fortified wines. So it is kind of an interesting area, I guess, climatically. And then you've got Beechworth. There's like that lovely big hill, and Beechworth town is just so nice.
Yeah, no, it's a lovely place to be.
And you've got one of the best restaurants in Victoria as well.
It's pretty good and phenomenally reasonably priced. I always think, it's too fancy to go to Provenance, and it's like, oh no, it's actually reasonably affordable for what is effectively just top-notch fine dining.
And I think that's the idea is that they're trying to keep it, approachable for people. They're so hospitable, and that kind of comes through, I guess, on the pricing as well.
They're doing a seasonal restaurant at Hotham this winter.
I did read that. That is very, very exciting. I'll definitely be dragging my dad and my sister to that.
Yeah, we're going to have to stay overnight somewhere up there. The diversity of Northeast Victoria is wonderful, but it's also tricky as well, because selling wine, which ultimately you have to do to have a sustainable business, relies on fairly simple messages. And we've got a good group of friends in Rutherglen now who still tip their hats to fortifieds. They keep Soleras going and things like that, and they make fortifieds, but what excites them is dry table wines. And you've got to be quite smart about the way you do it in Rutherglen to sell your product outside of Rutherglen. Rutherglen's market's almost completely cellar door driven, so it tends to define, everyone makes their fortifieds, but then what they make that's not fortified tends to be driven by the cellar door market. And the couple of friends I've got down there, they obviously service their cellar door market, but what they're passionate about, savoury or more lithe reds, you've just got to be a bit smart about it. And King and Alpine Valleys have this incredible diversity from, top-notch sparkling sites at Whitfield, down to solid red sites, and with what Joe Marsh is doing with alternative varieties out of Alpine Valleys, it's a wonderful time to be up there, and we're really, really fortunate to have moved there when there's a few other people doing things as well. We've got a nice peer network, and we don't all make wine the same way, but we respect the way each other's doing it, and it's good to bounce ideas off people. And
that's really important, I think.
Oh my gosh,
because there are some regions I've visited recently which are anything but collaborative.
Like Mornington Peninsula is collaborative, but I lived there for 5 years, and I don't have a single friend from there. Mainly just because everyone has a partner who works in town, so you live in the suburbs, and you don't.
Beechworth isn't exactly less than an hour into the city.
Yeah, so one of the delightful things about moving up there was we had a gang of
much more sense of community.
Yeah, we had a new gang of friends in like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect it, and it's been the biggest blessing.
So as we speak, I'm actually eyeing off a bottle that you have brought along with me, and this is from the 2014 vintage.
Yep. So the name of the wine, Brunnen, is vineyard designate.
Right.
So we planted vine.
So the winery name or the business name is
Vignerons Schmölzer and Brown.
Right.
Yeah, because we're Vignerons.
Why not Brown and Schmölzer?
Pragmatic reasons.
Sure.
VS&B is a good website name. VB&S sounds like beer and a B&S ball, and I went to a few of those when I was in my early 20s, and I don't need to be reminded of them. So VS and
if you don't want to be if you don't know what a B&S ball is, go onto YouTube and put in B&S ball, and there's a great story that was done by Vice.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Interesting or just messy?
Interesting.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Brunnen is a part of the vineyard?
No. Okay, so we planted vines last spring. We won't get fruit from our vineyard. We're calling Thorley. Our property is called Thorley.
Okay.
Which is the maiden name of the soldier settler guy maiden name of the mum of the soldier settler guy that got the property back in the day. There's this very, very small vineyard across the road from our farm, and they hadn't produced a crop for a few years, and we didn't pay them much mind when we first moved up there because we thought they'd be sorted out, because fruit's quite hard to come by in Beechworth. But after we'd been there about 6 months and we got to know the guys that owned the little block, it turned out that they didn't have a home for their fruit and that they hadn't had a crop for a few years because there was a few tricky vintages, like obviously 11 was tricky, 12 was tricky, and I think something happened to them in 10. I'm not entirely sure. So yeah, they didn't have a home for their fruit. I sort of put my viticulture hat on and thought, oh well, it's a mature vineyard. It's only about 1.5 acres. But it had gotten not run down over 4 years, but just when you've not been able to produce a crop, you sort of lose a little bit of enthusiasm. So
I can imagine.
Yeah, it really all it needed was another pair of foliage wires, a little bit more trimming, a little bit of shoot thinning work, little bit of lateral removal on the morning sun side, and some crop thinning. So we got in and worked with a guy who's an IT consultant, so vineyards is not his first passion. He just sort of planted the vines 20 years ago as a bit of fun, with cuttings that he got from Michelini's down in Alpine Valley. So look, nice mature vineyard, dry growing, because our part of Beechworth's fairly high rainfall, and it just needed a little bit of TLC, and we got a little bit of fruit from it in the 14 vintage, and we'll keep working with those guys moving forwards. They're neighbours, they're nice, we like each other.
Okay.
And it's nice to have a mature vine resource as well. So yeah, we made Chardonnay and a bit of Pinot in 14, as well as a rosé with fruit that we purchased from Mark Walpole at Gully Road. We got a ton of Sangiovese from him, and we took a ton of Pinot from that vineyard and put it over to rosé. So yeah, we've got 3 wines, and we'll continue with that 3 wines until Thorley's up and producing. And
so what have you actually planted on the Thorley vineyard?
At the moment, Shiraz and Chardonnay.
Sure.
And this spring, Riesling and Nebbiolo.
That's exciting.
It is. Riesling, finally. And Nebbiolo as well.
Nebbiolo, I guess, to a certain extent, has established a little bit of an identity in Beechworth, but Riesling's not a particularly strong variety from that. I mean, not that it's not good, but it's just like, I haven't heard that many Rieslings from Beechworth.
No, but Riesling.
Yeah,
it's self-explanatory.
Yeah, it's hard not to get excited.
Greatest grape on earth. We have a high
Riesling. I will say, I think, is probably the ultimate terroir translator for me. Hopefully we provide a reasonable opportunity for it to express itself. Our site is quite high and fairly cool. We are taking perhaps a little. I don't think we are taking a risk with Nebbiolo. I think we'll be fine. Our site is a warm amphitheatre site in a cooler area, so I think protected.
I think we'll be fine. But yeah, I would very much like to make just dry to potentially indetectably off dry textural Riesling, because it's beautiful wine. And look, yeah, Beechworth may not have a name for Riesling, but 25 years ago it didn't have a name for Gamay either.
That's a good point. And now it certainly does internationally as well. So in terms of availability of the wines, do you actually have any wines available for people to buy at the moment?
At the moment, we just have our Pinot available. We've just started going around showing a few people that, but I thought I'd bring this along tonight because it's been reasonably well received. And you haven't tried any of our wines before, so I thought I'd bring what we thought was the standout from the vintage. Yeah.
And you'll have some 15 vintage wines going into bottle at some point?
Yep, we'll bottle 15 Rosé in July and 15 Chardonnay and Pinot in January of 16. And we've actually made a cheeky little red blend that will sit alongside the Rosé, but that's not strictly Beechworth fruit. That's going to be a blend of Beechworth and Alpine Valleys. There was a lovely grower down. I'm quite good friends with Jo Marsh, and I don't know if you're across what she's doing, but she seems to be leading a single-handed surge in bringing up the reputation of Alpine Valleys wines. She's an absolute powerhouse, and she's found all these wonderful growers who sort of just haven't quite been getting the avenues for their fruit that gives the fruit the best opportunity to get in front of the people it should be getting in front of. So she has a grower, Bob McNamara in Wirrali, and he's got a parcel of Shiraz that was going to Grant Burge as a blender to sort of bring a bit of freshness and spice to warmer blends.
Acids, probably.
Pardon?
And acidity.
Yeah, but with the merger of Grant Burge and Constellation, was that what it was? I don't read my daily wine news enough. They rationalised the wine volumes and stopped taking Bob's fruit. So we took a few tons of Alpine Valley Shiraz, and we're blending it with a little bit of Sangiovese and maybe a little bit of Pinot. We'll see. Yep. So
we will see.
Yes, all fun and games. So yeah.
And in terms of people getting in contact or following and finding out when the new wines will be released, what's the best way for them to get all that information?
We're reasonably lo-fi at the moment. We have
We like lo-fi.
We have a placeholder website which has our phone numbers and email addresses on it, and if people flick us an email, we will write back to them and take care of them and look after them.
And do we have any presence on the social media?
Oh, I've got an Insta account, but it's a personal one.
But I follow the Instagram account, and I loved seeing stuff during vintage about who drawing pictures of people who are helping in the cellars on the tanks.
I've got to keep going with that. I've got about 10 more people to draw that I haven't drawn yet, I've got to get around to that.
And your Instagram account is
Tessa L Brown.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm not. Yeah, we're not really social media marketers. I sort of take the Rockford approach. Get in touch, and I'll give you my time, and same with Jeremy as well. So
the website is
www.vsmb.com.au, and you can get our email.
VS and or ampersand.
I don't think you can use an ampersand on. Yeah, it's vsandb.com.au, and drop us an email or give us a phone call, and we will stop what we're doing and talk to you.
And if you see a bottle on a wine list, then you must order it.
Please do. Yes.
But thank you very much for making some time, Tess, and I hope you have. I'm looking forward to trying this wine, and obviously I'm looking forward to some of the 2015s. And obviously, once the vineyard does start to bear some fruit, that's going to end up in some wine. I'm looking forward to trying that too. Yes,
hopefully you'll definitely see more of us in the coming years. Thank you very much for having me to talk to you tonight.
My pleasure. And as always, guys, thank you very much for listening to another episode of the Vincast. I have been James Scaresbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino. As always, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram @IntrepidWino, and you can follow the podcast on @the Vincast. On Facebook, you can find me under Intrepid Wino, and of course, everything you might want to know about me is on intrepidwino.com. Every episode of the podcast, lots of different writings and tasting notes, and lots of different stories about my experiences. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, Player FM, rate and review, share it as much as possible, because I'd love to get more listeners to the podcast. My question for this week is, what was your epiphany wine, if you have one? Let me know, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, through the website, email thevincast@gmail.com. Let me know, and I will hopefully read out your responses on the next episode. But until then, bye.